Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Biblically Serious, where we're all about understanding the Bible and owning our faith. Today, I'm coming to you with a different type of video. I wanted to share my Unplugged Bible study routine with you all. Have you ever felt so overwhelmed with just being connected to the world? I mean, maybe you are constantly scrolling on social media, you're binge watching shows on TV, or maybe you're just on your computer constantly working. The constant access to notification and information about people's lives and just news all over the world can cause a lot of anxiety. So I have definitely felt this. I have found that an unplugged Bible study has helped me to really just disconnect and calm my mind to position myself to really hear from God. So this stripped down Bible study is not going to be as exhaustive as some other ones that I talked about on my channel, like the biblical exegesis video where I had multiple commentaries, or I talked about having interlinear and access to all these different online resources. Instead, we are going to strip down our resources here to anything that is in print or like pen and paper, and just focus on the Bible and listening. This stripped down version is really going to limit us to just a couple of resources. I'll have a study Bible, a notepad, some pens and highlighters, and then a drink. So let's jump into my routine and I'll show you guys exactly how I do my Bible study unplugged edition. So the first thing I do is I cut off the TV. I put my phone out of sight, out of mind, way away. And then I pull out all the resources that I need. So for today, I am going to be using the ESV Study Bible, a notepad, and then some pens and highlighters. I'm also making some tea today, but sometimes I'll do some water or some coffee. And this just helps me to when my mind starts wandering, then it helps me to take a sip, calm down, and refocus on what I am reading. So now that we have all the materials on the table, let's jump into the Bible study. I'm going to go through Colossians, and I'm going to be going through it for the first time ever. And one thing that I really like about the ESV Study Bible, or most study Bibles have this, is that they'll have an intro to the book for every book of the Bible. So it's a few pages that cover the author, the date, the themes. Sometimes there's even maps and timelines to help you understand how this book relates to other books and other stories in the Bible. So that's what I'm gonna go do first. Anytime I would start a new book, I like to go through the introduction just to kind of orient myself a little bit. So I'm gonna take a few notes on my notepad for that, and then I will get into chapter 1.
In this section, I'm writing down the authors, the date, the purpose of the book, the themes that come up in this book, as well as the history of the church.
I've just read through the intro to Colossians, and in my notebook, I took a couple of notes in black pen. And I like to write in black pen, but then also have some extra color pens just in case I have any questions or any assumptions. I like to write them in another color because then I can try to go back to them after I've started reading through the actual book of Colossians and validate if I can get the answers to them. And if I still can't get the answers to them, I may eventually go to a commentary when I'm not unplugged anymore. So that was just the intro, and I will say the intro did have a lot of information. So if you decide that you want to just go through the intro one day and in one sitting, and then you may go through chapter 1 later or in the next sitting, that's also okay. I've done that before. There's times I've gotten through an intro and I'm just wow, there's a lot, and I want to look up some of these things before my next sitting and before I get into chapter 1. But we're going to go ahead and go dive into chapter 1 right now. Sometimes I won't sit down and do a whole chapter at a time. It just depends on how long the chapter is. But my goal usually is to get through one chapter at a time. What I'll do is I'll read through the whole chapter all the way through. And then from there, I'll start studying each of the sections within the chapter. And the way that I know it's a section of a chapter is because it has those little like subtitles. For chapter 1, there's like the greeting, thanksgiving and prayer, the preeminence of Christ, Paul's ministry to the church, and then that's it. 4 sections help me to break up my studying so that it doesn't feel like an overwhelming path. They kind of serve as my checkpoints to say, let me dive in really deep in this section. Let me come up for air to make sure I'm understanding what I'm reading, and then let's move on to the next section. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to read through chapter 1, and then I'm going to go through each section and start taking notes.
As I read through the chapter, I'm not trying to analyze anything. I'm trying to get through it in one pass and just write down my observations or anything that stands out to me.
I just finished reading through all of chapter 1, and just a few things stood out to me. 1, how grateful Paul was for the Colossian church. 2, how much he preached the gospel to them and just kind of like reminded them of who Christ is, who God is. 3rd would be this call and this kind of expectation to grow in your faith. This is what I've gotten so far from chapter 1. So now I'm excited to go line by line, word by word, and really go deeper. So let's start off with the greeting. Anytime there's an intro, I'm always just like, how is Paul introducing himself?
I'm being very analytical here. I'm reading the whole sentence. I'm breaking that sentence up into phrases. And then sometimes I'm getting as granular as questioning some of the words. I'm not only writing down what I observe, but I'm also writing down questions for the text, my own interpretation of the text as well.
Before we go to Thanksgiving and prayer, I want to go through another Pauline epistle and see how he introduces himself. I'm curious to see if he introduces himself as an apostle in the other ones as well. So I'm just going to go back. I'll start with Romans. Paul is a servant of Christ, called to be an apostle. 1 Corinthians. Paul, called by the will of God to be an apostle. And then let's just look at one more. Galatians. Paul, an apostle. Okay, that's pretty consistent. I don't know what that told me, but I'm like, oh, it's consistent. So I feel like that means I don't necessarily need to look at why it's different. So there's also some other like verses to cross-reference. I usually don't go and cross-reference them unless I'm curious about something or I have a question. But you also saw, for my own curiosity, I kind of cross-referenced on my own. There's also on the bottom a commentary. I make sure I read that last after I've already like kind of questioned the text a little bit, after I've already tried to interpret it a little bit on my own and like describe what's happening. That way I'm not just only reading someone else's opinion, but also trying to hear from God as I'm going through this on my own, and then kind of using the commentary to help fill in the gaps or to serve as guardrails to try to understand, am I interpreting it correctly? Am I on the right path? In the commentary section of this study Bible, for greetings, it says, Paul begins the letter in his typical fashion, which, hey, we saw that, right? We already said it's his typical fashion because I compared them, by calling on God to pour out his grace and peace upon the Colossian church. So I didn't see grace and peace. Oh, I see it now. We didn't get that far, but that's a good thing to note. Okay, it also says Paul, an apostle. We already made a note of like Paul introducing himself as an apostle. We saw he did that consistently in the other letters. Let's just take a note in red and layer on anything that I'm adding to my notes that is not from my own brain, which is from the commentary, because I think it's just good to distinguish the two as I take my notes. Okay, now I am going to put the red pen away. I'm going to go back to my black pen as I go through the Thanksgiving and prayer section.
As I go through this section, I am using the same pattern I highlighted in the beginning of having my black pen in hand, reading each sentence, each phrase, each word, and writing down any notes, any observations. Then I'm taking my blue pen to write down any questions I may have. I'm using the cross references to help me to gain some clarity and to help me answer my questions of the text with other biblical passages. Then I'm taking my red pen to see if the commentary answers any of the questions that I raised, and also to see if there's any extra context or notes I want to add in to my notes. At the end of the section, I will read over my notes, summarize it, try to summarize it in a sentence or two, and then move on to the next section. And then I keep doing this until I get to the end of the chapter. At the end of the chapter, I want to write a summary for the whole chapter in about a sentence or two as well.
I hope you guys enjoyed this Unplugged Bible study, and I would love for you to try it out and let me know how it works for you. I see you guys in the next video. Bye.